Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we've got a very exciting one indeed. It's one I've been looking forward to for weeks now, and I've been saving it for when the timing was right, and today is that day for me. We're jumping into a review of a couple of beers from the same brewer, same style, but different sub-styles. Both beers, as per usual, I did get from Tavour. So we're jumping into a brewer. I've only had a handful of beers from them prior. All of them were very good. This is Logsdon Farmhouse Ales. And today, specifically, we are jumping into pilsners. So the first one is a Czech Style Pilsner. This one clocks in at 4.5% ABV. They brewed it with Bohemian Pils malt, which is a Czech style of malt, and with Saz hops, which is a noble hop, one of the Czech ones. So this is sticking true to the Czech Republic as the brew point for their ingredients. So they're sticking as true to the style as possible, and I absolutely love Czech Pilsners. I'm very excited to try this one. Moving on to number two. This is a newer sub-style of Pilsners. This one is called Ferragosto. This is an Italian style Pilsner that clocks in slightly higher at 4.9% ABV. Now this one is a new sub-style that really is a bigger, bolder, kind of amped up version of a cross between a German style Pils and some of what you would maybe find in Italy, but I think it is actually an American-made sub-style, at least from what I can tell and recall. Nonetheless, they started with a relatively classic German noble hop base, Tettnang and Spalter, and then they dry hopped with some more nobles and then some addeds. So dry hopped with Hallertau, Mittelfrüh, and Saphir hops, which is not related to a standard classic Pilsner at all. So we've got the same brewer with two different sub-styles of the same overarching beer style, and I'm really excited to jump into both of these, see the differences in how they present themselves, and I'm a massive fan. It's been too long since I've had a craft Pilsner. We're going to dive right in, starting with the Logsdon Farmhouse Ales Czech Style Pilsner that clocks in at 4.5% ABV. Okay, so jumping right into the first beer of today's Logsdon Farmhouse Ales Pilsner review, we have got their Czech Style Pilsner. That's the name of it and also the style. 4.5% ABV on this one. Logsdon Farmhouse Ales is based in Washugai. I'm not sure how to pronounce that city, but it is in Washington State. Again, to recap, single malt, single hop. For the malt, they went with Bohemian Pilsner malt. For the hop, they went with Saz, which is a Czech noble hop. So they went with a very classic malt bill and hop selection here, keeping it true to style and true to origin point, the Czech Republic. And if you did not know, Bohemia is a region in the Czech Republic, obviously a big art center, and just a ton of culture there, artistically and beer related. They're big brewers and consumers of beer in the Czech Republic, and this is one of the most famous, to be certain. Of course, Pilsner, there's a very good reason. It is the most widely consumed, brewed, and imitated beer style in the world, and for a very good reason. It's just always a good decision, and today I'm looking forward to seeing what their take is. Terms of label art, it's got their Logsdon logo. It's got a little mountain in the background. I'm guessing they're in a burb of Seattle, that city, because I'm presuming that that is Mount Rainier in the background. But nonetheless, very clean label. We're going to get this cracked. And we'll get this in the glass quicker than later because I did not crack that particularly gently, but that's okay. We've got our nice handy dandy Pils glass here. Been too long since I've had occasion to pull this one out. If you can't tell, I am indeed very excited. I absolutely love Pilsners. I don't drink them as often as I should. And frankly, I'll go with a craft Pilsner. I'll go with a big market Pilsner, though that is typically going to be German or Czech. Technically, by American craft brewing standards, it's not craft by our definition, but when I'm looking at international beers, I'm really looking at quality. It's brewed in the same spirit, even if it's brewed on a larger scale. So I'm going to let that settle just a bit. That head formed that classic Pilsner head. Got these classic, super tight, fine champagne-like bubbles coming up, and that is indeed that classic light, pale straw yellow color. In terms of aroma, I can tell you as soon as I started pouring this in the glass, the aroma is quite pronounced. Pilsners can kind of be all over the board. They're not typically known for being the most aromatic beers, but this one in particular is. So I'm wondering if maybe they hopped this a lot more heavily than your typical Czech Style Pilsner. Maybe that's their kind of twist on it. But nonetheless, let's get right over it. Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah. So that smells exactly like what I think of in my head when I think of Pilsner. It's got this kind of, there's a slight baked goods side to it. It smells very earthy. It smells like bits of grass and raw wheat. That's one of the overarching, you know, a Pilsner when you smell it. And this one smells exactly like what I think the average beer drinker that consumes Pilsners with any regularity would be thinking of in their head when they think of a Pilsner. It smells the part. It's just got a significantly more pronounced aroma than your average Pils. In terms of hops, you can smell they're in there, but overwhelmingly, it's the malt bill that's doing the talking, and that's okay. That is very prototypical for a Pils. That's actually what I expect, one of the things I love the most about them. So, I did top that back off. Yes, it obviously is going to mean that head is going to make a mess in my beard, but that's okay. That's what a Pilsner does. That's how it should look. We're going to jump right in and see what this one's about. Oh my. Oh, that is a nice Pilsner. Wow. Okay. Absolutely, yeah. God, every single time I have a Pilsner, it's that same reaction like, why don't I drink more of these with more regularity? God, it's such a great beer style. There's a reason it's the most popular in the world. It's just so good. It's just so refreshing. There's nothing about it that is off-putting. And the craft interpretation, sure, it can be a bigger, more flavorful beer than maybe the average consumer that's coming in from mass market, big box, American, not craft beer, maybe would be scared off by the abundance of aroma and flavor. But gosh, this is just really, really good. Okay, so first thing first, pungency of flavor is there. Every bit of that classic Pilsner malt really comes through quite clearly, and that is the dominant factor in a classic Pils. Yes, some are hopped a little more heavily than others, and they do tend to have a little bit of a hop bite on the back, but it's really all about the malt that goes into making this beer style and making it such a, you know it when you taste it. For me, this is just a classic, great representation of a Czech Style Pilsner. All of the flavors I expect to find in there are there. And the flavor really does mimic the aroma in this beer style almost more than any other I could think of. Kind of what you smell is what you're going to get. Really the only question mark is how big is that hop bite going to be? So on this one, really, really nice grainy quality to those Bohemian Pilsner malts. Really nice. A lot of bread-like qualities, a lot of wheat-like qualities. There are some grass-like qualities. It's very of the earth and very baked goodness. That's what that malt bill speaks to me. That's what it always says in a Pilsner. It's particularly true in this, and yes, it's very flavor forward. This has a bit more pungency of flavor than your average Pils. A couple things that are a little bit interesting on this one. They used a classic low alpha acid noble hop Saz, also Czech, as we've talked about, but it's not as bold in terms of the hop bite as you get in a lot of different Pilsners, craft or otherwise. It's there. There's this little bit of subtle bittering on the back, but it's not pungent, it's not bold, and it's not really letting the length extend, which is actually true to the style. Pilsners are very known for their clean, crisp finishes. They really don't have lingering flavors that stick around in the back of the palate, extending the length of the finish on each sip. Some do, just based on how heavily they're hopped and the different blends of hops that they put in there. This one is very crisp. Speaking of crisp, the average Pilsner is pretty crisp and starts to give that slight drying effect pretty quickly on the end of the sip. This one took probably 20-30 seconds before that dryness factor started to get there. At first I was thinking that's interesting. Kind of a wet round, a finish on a Pils, but then it finally happened. It was just very slow to it, which gives a slightly different feel, but it's still there. It just took longer to get to that stage. Overall, very, very nice, very well done Czech Style Pilsner. I am really enjoying this. I'm going to go in for one more sip, think about anything else I might have missed. It's just so good, I want another sip here. It's just so good. It's so refreshing. There's always this slight sensation of like ripe citrus and apples when I drink a Pilsner, which it doesn't really taste like that at all, but there's this combination of flavors on the front that I get that a lot. This one kind of has that too, like a mix of maybe lemon and a tart like a Granny Smith apple up front, and then immediate baked good, weediness, earthiness, bread-like notes, crust-like notes, a little bit of underlying grassiness. It's all in there. This is a really nice beer. In terms of body and mouthfeel, it's light. As you might expect for a Pils, it is not a heavy body. It's a light body. The mouthfeel feels exactly as a Pilsner should. A little bit of effervescence in there, not really much different than the viscosity of water in terms of mouthfeel. What I can tell you on this one is that agitating around the palate, it does get quite creamy. That's pretty common with the Pils. That does happen with this one. So pretty much everything I would expect to find here, I found, which is exactly what I was hoping for. I love Czech Style Pilsners. This is very true to the style, and they used proper Czech ingredients for the beer that they made. Overall, my first impression here, Logsdon Farmhouse Ales, bravo on your Czech Style Pilsner. I can't wait to jump into the next one. But for now, I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, come with my scores. When we come back, we will get to their second, that is Ferragosto, the Italian style Pilsner that clocks in at 4.9% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's Logsdon Farmhouse Ales Pilsner review, we've got the Italian Pilsner of the bunch. This one's called Ferragosto, clocks in at 4.9% ABV. This one's specifically brewed with Tettnang and Spalter hops. So again, we're going into those classic hop profiles here. Then they dry hopped it with Hallertau, Mittelfrüh, and Saphir. So by and large, we're looking at an amalgam of noble hops, and really that's kind of the shtick. And this Italian Pilsner is a new kind of sub-style. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit bolder. It's an interesting new take, and so far I'm a fan. This one, in terms of label art, it looks like an old Italian villa sitting there. It looks quite nice, moving around. So that's about the extent. So we're just going to get this cracked gently. I'll try to be a little more gentle than I was on the last one. Okay, it did not get away from me. And we're going to pour it right in the glass. I'm going to start it more or less as normally, speed up a bit, let it get some head creation going here, and then I'm going to slow it down again so it doesn't get quite so out of control as that last one. Okay, yes, that's much better poured. That's much better poured. It's been a while since I've poured into this glass. It does take practice. So, yet again, essentially identical to the last beer. That classic light straw pale yellow color, effervescence. This one's got little fine beads of super tiny champagne-like bubbles, but it's also got a few little larger comparative to the last, but looks very much classic. Formed again a classic Pilsner head, and just as with the last beer, this one, as soon as I started pouring it, you can really smell it. It smells exactly as a Pilsner should. And it's one of those things, the aroma sensation really does get one in the mood for a beer. And there are a few that really kind of set with the brain quite like a Pilsner. It's just, I associate that aroma with refreshing immediately, right away. That's where my brain goes. So let's get right on top of it. Yeah, I mean, this just smells so nice. Virtually indistinguishable from the last beer. It's essentially got that same classic profile. Smells of baked goods. It smells rather weedy, a little bit grass-like, a little bit of that hoppiness. This one smells distinctly a little more bitter. There's a little more earthy kind of bitter that's floating on the nose here. Yep. Slight kind of tart appley, maybe even some slight lemonish undercurrents. It smells quite nice. I mean, just a delicious smelling beer. Looks great. Head's holding true. Let's jump in. yeah, that's very nice. So immediately, first thing I thought when I got it in my mouth, swishing around the palate, just as with the last one, quite a bit thicker, quite a bit creamier than your average Pils. What I was also noticing was this beer actually seems to have quite a bit more weight and quite a bit more thickness and resistance than your average Pilsner, to be certain, like substantially. Pilsners more or less feel basically flat or comparative to that of water, and you can feel the effervescence. This actually feels like it has some real substance to it, which is not common for a standard Pilsner. Italian Pilsners, this is about the third or fourth I've had. This one's probably the biggest feeling in terms of breadth of the body and resistance to the mouthfeel. And we're not talking Imperial Stout here, guys. This is still a Pilsner, but it's markedly heavier and markedly more resistant and thicker than your average Pils. One of the distinctions for this new substyle. Secondly, this one has a nice big hop bite to it. There is discernible, notable bitters, and it's actually lingering on my palate quite a bit longer than the first. And this kind of seems to be keeping with the trend of the substyle. This is only, like I said, my third or fourth Italian Pilsner, but so far I'm starting to get a really good picture of what they're about. So, in terms of overall flavor profile, this one is a lot more hop-centric. You do still get these very baked-like good undercurrents and notes. There's this kind of wheatiness, this breadiness, this toastiness, this crustiness to it. And there are some other subtleties. Most of what I'm getting are subtleties coming from the hop, and kind of binding with that, there is this rather intense earthiness to it. So it's kind of reminding me of elements of, say, pale ales or IPAs, but in this wonderful Pilsner format. And just as with any Pilsner, it's nice and refreshing. One thing I can tell you that is different about this one, I did not really pick up but the slightest hint of discernible dryness on the end of the finish. And the finish really lingers quite long on this one. The actual finish itself is pretty clean. It's not that long, it feels wet, and then it takes quite a while for a little suggestion of dryness, but really what's leaving residual is this haunting sense of bitters, and it's quite earthy. Very, very nice beer. I'm going to jump back in, see if I missed anything else, see what intensifies on second sip. Yeah. Second sip intensifies for sure. All of the baked good notes really get intensified, and what I smelled with this slight kind of lemony suggestion, that actually does translate into the glass. There's a little bit of lemon flavor, but it doesn't taste tart, it doesn't taste sweet, it's not candied. It distinctly tastes of lemon, but it's bound to this really intense bitterness that feels quite earthy, but then that citrus kind of side that I'm getting in here really kind of puts me in mind, again, we talk about this a lot, of citrus oil or rind. So it's this intense bitterness to it. We're not talking like pungent IPA with 150 IBUs or anything, but for a Pilsner, quite prominent, quite prominent. This puts me in mind of some of my favorite classic German and Czech Style Pilsners that are a lot more heavily hopped and a lot more hop-centric. Yes, the beer is still wonderfully refreshing and wonderfully light, but it's got real substance to it. It's got real flavor to it. This one is really, really good. I am going to take my time sip on this, come up my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both beers, we're going to get them ranked, starting with the Logsdon Farmhouse Ales Czech Style Pilsner. This one clocked in at 4.5% ABV. Again, Logsdon Farmhouse Ales is based in Washugai, Washington. So starting with the aroma on this one was fantastic. It was quite bold, quite pungent, even more so than your average Pils. As soon as I started to pour it, I could pick up everything. All the underlying tones that come straight from the malt bill, as well as their well chosen hop bill. Aroma on this one gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, very enjoyable. Classic Pilsner malt bill here, and all of the classic underlying flavors. Had the breadiness, had the wheatiness, kind of grassiness, some subtle fruit aromas. Then the really well chosen classic noble hop bill that they used in here. The only thing I was thinking was I would have liked just a little bit more of the hop bite on this one, a little more present typically on a Czech style pils, but overall very, very well done. Taste gets a 9 out of 10. For the body, this was textbook Pilsner. It gets a 10 out of 10. The mouthfeel, same thing here. Everything about the body and the mouthfeel on this beer was exactly right. Mouthfeel also gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this one, the finish was really, really great. It was quite a bit longer than your average Pilsner, and frankly, the thing that caught me a little bit by surprise was at first I didn't think there was going to be that nice classic crisp dryness in the back, but it did finally present itself. It just took a while. Overall, the classic flavors, very, very clean as anticipated, and had a good bit of length thanks to those hops. Finish gets a 9 out of 10. Head and retention, this was classic Pilsner. It gets that perfect 10 out of 10. For the appearance, yet again, classic Pilsner. That straw pale yellow color, that's what we want to see. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this was really nice. Overall, I thought it was above average, but again, really for me, that Czech style, it's a little more hop present as a rule. This was not lacking in hops, but it was lacking a little bit in the bitters being extracted out. It was missing some of that bite. Still above average though. Balance gets a 7 out of 10. Feeling in the tangible, subjectively, I really, really enjoyed this. Thought that this was well above average for Czech style pils. Gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, overall, did very well in most categories. Lost just a few points here and there, but in the grand scheme of things, this was a very, very well-crafted Czech style Pilsner. I only docked 1 point, gets a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Logsdon Farmhouse Ales Czech Style Pilsner to a 92 out of 100. Now for a little contrast, this is their Italian Style Pilsner Ferragosto, 4.9% ABV on this one. I'm starting with the aroma. Just as with the first, it was almost indiscernible, the aromas here. All the same hallmarks with that same pungency. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, I've had 3, 4, maybe going on 5 now Italian Pilsners. They've popped up in the last year or two. New sub style, I'm a big, big fan. It takes kind of all the best parts of my favorite Pilsners, which are German and Czech as a rule, and it kind of amps them up, just throws a little monkey wrench in the ring, and it still keeps that true to style, distinct classic Pilsner flavor. It's just bigger, bolder, more present, and has an even bigger hop bite. I absolutely loved it. Taste on this one, 10 out of 10. For the body on this was significantly larger than your average Pilsner. Frankly, I haven't had enough Italian Pilsners that I've really been able to fine-tune, okay, is this the norm, is that the norm? But it's got that higher ABV as well, comparative to the first. 4.9, that's a pretty classic ABV range for a Pilsner. Most German pils, you're going to get somewhere in that 4.9 to 5.1 range. This fit the bill, but it had a lot of presence to it. Body, I did give a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same thing. This was not your typical Pilsner mouthfeel. It had a lot more resistance to it. In terms of how it felt and the effervescence, that all was there, but it felt like it had a lot more presence to it, a lot more weight, a lot more resistance. Mouthfeel, I gave it 10 out of 10. For the finish on this one, quite long. It was quite hop forward, and a lot of those bitters were present as well. That really helped extend the length of the finish. Just as with the first one, it took a while, but there was a little bit of a drying on the back end. Not quite as pronounced in this one as on the first, but it was present. Just took a while to get there. Finish, 10 out of 10. Head and retention, overall this one did a very good job. It was classic pils, not quite as impressive as on the first one. Docked 1 point here, gets a 9 out of 10. For the appearance, textbook, 10 out of 10. Balance, really I couldn't say anything negative about the balance on this beer. I absolutely loved it. I got every bit of that malt bill, every bit of the hops that they put into this one, and they all work perfectly together. Balance, 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, subjectively, I loved it. Just a great beer. I really like this new kind of sub-style of pils. I'm always keeping my eyes out. I've yet to have one that's disappointed me yet. Subjectively, a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this beer swept it in all but one category. It does get a 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Logsdon Farmhouse Ales Ferragosto to a 99 out of 100. So we're only looking at a 7-point spread here, 92 and a 99. Both of these absolutely top tier Pilsners. Logsdon Farmhouse Ales really did a good thing here. Kept them true to style, went inventive when they needed to be, kind of put their own twist on it, but what they ended up crafting was 2 top tier Pilsners for my money. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, just click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.